Welcome to the Global News Podcast from the BBC. Hello, I'm Oliver Conway. And today we're joined by our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg. And Steve, we're talking about Vladimir Putin's visit to China to meet Xi Jinping. Now, they call each other old friends. Just how close is their relationship?
They've certainly developed a pretty close relationship, and they've certainly had the opportunity to do that. I think the two leaders have met more than 40 times. And yes, they called each other friends. I think back in September, when Vladimir Putin was in Beijing, he addressed Xi as my dear friend, and Xi called Putin my old friend. And, you know, there are many moments I can remember, thinking back over the last few years, the moment when Putin and Xi cooked pancakes together, a sign of friendship, pancakes with caviar, and Vladimir Putin gave Xi a big case of ice cream for his birthday, just to illustrate the friendly relationship between the two men. Now, what brings them together? There are many things that unite them. Russia and China share a border, a very long border, so it's in their interest, the interest of their countries, to get on, to make sure that they have a good working relationship. And to an extent, they share a similar worldview. Both Russia and China have challenged US supremacy. But I want to show you one thing. This is the front page of the Russian government newspaper. On Monday, a picture paints 1,000 words. There are two pictures here. One of Donald Trump going up the steps into Air Force One at the end of his visit to China a few days ago. Very kind of lonely looking figure there. And next to that, a picture of Xi and Putin, a file picture, the two men side by side in step. This is what Russia wants to stress, I think, about this trip, the strategic partnership between Russia and China, as opposed to the strategic rivalry between America and China.
Yeah, I think this is something like Vladimir Putin's 25th visit to China. Now, he won't get any of the pomp, or at least all of the pomp that we saw for Donald Trump last week. But I guess he doesn't need that because they are closer allies.
Yeah, he'll get some of the pomp, I think, for sure. The interesting thing is, one of the things he'll be doing in China is reaffirming the Russia-China friendship agreement that was signed 25 years ago. It's the 25th anniversary. And which Russian leader signed it 25 years ago? Vladimir Putin. It shows how long he's been in power. So I think, yes, I mean, the Trump-Xi meeting, that summit, really made headlines around the world, quite a rare event. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping regularly meet. So in that sense, nothing out of the ordinary.
You talked about the 25th anniversary of the signing of that friendship agreement, but over those years, the relative strengths of the two nations have changed substantially.
Yes, words you hear a lot: cooperation, partnership, no limits partnership, but actually it's not an equal partnership. Russia has become very dependent on China, particularly since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in 2022. And you remember that tsunami of international sanctions that was imposed on Russia, basically cutting off access to markets in Europe, in the West. And so Russia became heavily reliant on China economically. I mean, when you think about it, more than a quarter of Russia's exports are bought by China, including vast amounts of fossil fuel. I think China has reportedly bought more than $360 million worth of Russian fossil fuel since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. That gives you an idea of how dependent Russia has become. For Moscow, this money that it gets from selling to China has become an economic lifeline.
And what will Vladimir Putin be hoping to get out of this trip specifically?
Well, first of all, he will want to be seen with the big kid on the block, who is clearly Xi Jinping. China has become really the center of global diplomacy. When you think about it, the Iranian foreign minister was recently in Beijing, then Donald Trump was in Beijing, Vladimir Putin is coming to Beijing. So, being seen with the head of the superpower That's a big thing. It's important for Vladimir Putin to show that he is a player too on the world stage. In terms of concrete agreements, there will be several dozen, we're told, deals done, agreements signed between China and Russia. Vladimir Putin has taken with him a big delegation, senior officials, ministers, business leaders. One thing the Russians are particularly keen to sign is an agreement about getting on with the building of a new gas pipeline, Power of Siberia 2. This would bring more Russian gas, more Russian energy from Western Siberia via Mongolia into China. Now, this has been talked about for a long time. The two sides signed a memorandum a while back, but it hasn't actually moved forward enough. So I think the Russians will be keen to get something, some movement on that. Whether that's going to happen, we don't know.
Now, one thing the Russian media have been talking about is they will sign this apparent joint declaration on the emergence of a multipolar world. What does that mean? And what is the reality of Russia's relations, for example, with that other pole, the US?
Yeah, both Russia and China have, as I say, challenged the idea of US supremacy and talked about the importance of a multipolar world, not having one power dominating the planet. So that is one thing that brings them together. However, we often hear commentators talking about the axis, the China-Russia axis. It's important to remember that there are differences and there are disagreements between Russia and China. Both countries are keen to develop their relationships with the United States. And we saw when Donald Trump came to Beijing recently, we saw the start of perhaps a new relationship between the United States and China. And we've also seen Vladimir Putin trying to thaw relations with Donald Trump and lots of meetings between Vladimir Putin's envoys and Donald Trump's envoys. So both countries are trying to develop their own relationship with the United States. And I think Russia and China do see the world a little bit differently. For example, as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned, Europe right now is enemy number one. The Russians accuse Europe of prolonging the war in Ukraine, whereas Xi Jinping sees Europe very much as an economic partner. That's just one example of how there are differences between Moscow and Beijing.
President Trump has said that China could have a big influence on Vladimir Putin with regards to Ukraine. Is China likely to do anything there?
Well, that's an interesting question, and we'll be looking closely to see whether Ukraine is mentioned and what is said, and whether we find out what is said about Ukraine, because there's no doubt that China's support, its economic support for Russia over the last few years has been instrumental in helping Russia get through international sanctions, and there are reports of dual-use technology being supplied by China to Russia as well. So Chinese support has been very useful, very helpful to Russia over the last few years. And yes, American officials believe that if Xi decided to reduce that support, that would cause problems for Moscow.
And in summary, what will be the key things that you're looking out for during this visit?
I'll be looking out to see whether, number one, Russia and China do sign an agreement on building this new gas pipeline. That would be very good news for the Russians. It means they could sell more of their energy, and it would mean that China would get more energy to use. We'll be looking at the optics. I expect we're going to see Russia try to stress the fact that its relationship with China is closer, more special than Donald Trump's relationship with Xi Jinping. We've already been seeing that in the Russian press. But I don't think we're going to get too many other breakthrough agreements. This is a working meeting, basically. We've seen many meetings between the two men. And still important, though, for Vladimir Putin to come to Beijing and to coordinate with Xi, not just about their bilateral relations, but also about key international issues, not just Ukraine, but also the war in the Gulf, in the Middle East. It'll be interesting to see whether the two leaders come out with a coordinated position on that.
Steve, thank you. Steve Rosenberg, the BBC Russia editor in Moscow. If you'd like to hear more from the Global News podcast, click the link below. But thanks for watching.